Dear respected Thai, dear sisters, dear brothers, dear Sangha, I feel the presence of Thai in this room. Many times when I have to share in front of the Sangha, Thai always appeared, and it's quite daunting when Thai is there. But this time, Thai is there, but it's not as scary. Today is the 11th of June in the year 2018. We are in the Upper Hamlet, Stillwater Meditation Hall. The 13th, I'm sorry. The 13th, not the 11th. I remember when it was my family's turn, my ordination family's turn to receive the lamp. I went up to Thai and said, Thai, I'm not ready for the lamp. I need another 10 or 20 more years. And then Thai looked at me like with a smile, waiting for my reason. And I said, I'm afraid when I come up to the front, of the Sangha, that I would faint and fall down. And Thai was very kind and said, well, if you fall down, then stand up again. So I made the decision, and the Sangha made the decision that I would become a Dharma teacher. And in the last few years, when we had to come up here, in front of so many people, I always had this fear that I would faint in front of the Sangha. Like my legs would be wobbling and I would fall over. But then I practiced to ask Thai to come and give the talk. Because, Thai is the master, right? He's an expert. So I don't have to do the talk. And that helps. That helps me from being nervous in front of so many people. And 2 weeks before this retreat, I was in the United States, and I received an email from my brother, one of my brothers, Brother Phap Yung, and he asked me, so which topic would you like to talk for the 21 day? We had like a list of topics, and I wrote back and I said, may I not speak during this retreat? And I didn't hear any response, like I said, there's so many other brothers and sisters. Can I just not talk for this retreat? And so I thought I was off the hook, because I didn't hear his respond. And then the first thing I knew when I came back was that there's a meeting for the senior brothers and sisters. And I thought, oh dear. And so we came into the meeting, and I sort of had in mind of what I want to say, because these topics are quite above me. And then there's one topic that I felt comfortable, and I chose that topic. But my younger brother wanted that topic. I had a younger brother that was there, and I said, okay. And then everyone else insisted that I talk about the three Dharma seals, and I'm like, the three Dharma seal, Nirvana? What do I know about Nirvana to talk about Nirvana? And they were so insistent, especially my fish brother, my brother Phap Ung. He was like, you take that one, younger sister. You take that one, Shem. I'm like, okay, if you really want me to talk about the Dharma seal, okay, I'll take it. I'm practicing obedience. Accepting and listening to my older siblings. Sometimes my younger siblings too. And I thought, okay, if you really want me to talk on the three Dharma seals, well, give me some input, give me some idea. What did you want me to talk about, the three Dharma seals? So, at the beginning of the retreat, I received questions from Sister Chung Đức. I received an email from Sister Nghiem, who was just living next to me, when she wrote me this really long email and telling me what I should include and that I should trust in my ancestors to speak. And then I received a phone call from Brother Pháp Ứng, giving me some tips and some advices on what I should talk about. And then Brother Pháp Yung also sent me an email of information on Nirvana. So I know they're quite anxious for me right now. I wrote back to Brother Pháp Yung and I said, well, I don't need more information. I have enough information. I just need more time to cook. So I've been cooking this meal for you. Not up here, but more from down here, my store consciousness. I've brought all this information and suggestion into my store consciousness. And I don't really think. See, my problem is that I don't think. Maybe your problem is that you think too much. My problem is that I don't think. And so I've been cooking it, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, on the store level, the store consciousness level. And I thought, I'm missing one more ingredient to make this a really delicious meal. And that's you. And so, whether this meal is going to be good or not, it's you. It's responsible. So the ball is thrown to you, and you're responsible. And I'm off the hook. And I've been asking myself the question. I've been really asking you, but silently in my head, it's what are you doing here? So many people too, and so many experienced practitioners. Some of these brothers and sisters have been in the Dharma before me, that you have come to Plum Village before I came to Plum Village. And so what are you doing here anyways? Just giving you time to reflect, to allow this question to sink. We're here because every one of us had suffered to some degree, right? And we're looking for a path. We're looking for ways in order to manage our suffering and to cultivate joy and happiness. And many of us kept coming back because we've suffered less, we know how to manage our suffering, we have some degree of happiness and joy, and it gives us confidence in the practice, in the community. But when we come to the practice, it's not just about soothing our suffering, lessening our suffering, or living with joy and happiness. We have to be able to learn how to transform ourselves at the base. In other words, how to be free from fear, free from fear of dying, free from afflictions, and how to cultivate an insight into who we really are, like our true nature. So, in other words, how to go from just having daily concern to ultimate concerns. When we have ultimate concerns, we start to have questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Why am I here, on this planet? What's my purpose here? I went home and I see how my siblings and my nieces and nephews were just living through the day, working hard, earning lots of money, raising a family. My sister is getting really old now. She said she's feeling like she's my mom now. Being old and having lots of money and maybe traveling a bit, and then what else? And so having an ultimate concerns mean, for me, asking myself, how can I be useful to the world so that my life has meaning? How can I be useful? And I'm really grateful that I have the path. Because for me to be useful means that I have to first transform myself and cultivate and having the freedom from afflictions, freedom from fears, so that I can be more present, so that I can be more useful. It's only when I'm free that I can be useful, when I can be truly happy that I'm useful. And so the Buddha came into the world to help us end our suffering and to help us experience true happiness, right? And so the very first teachings that the Buddha taught was on the Four Noble Truths. We've learned already. that there is the presence of suffering. And there are causes and conditions that brought about the suffering. And that there are ways for us to look into this suffering and to work with this suffering so that we can transform this suffering and experience happiness and peace. So, over the decades, over the centuries, people emphasize on so much about suffering because it's one of the noble truths. And Brother Phakam has said that it's not just after the time of the Buddha, in the Buddha's disciple, but even before the time of the Buddha, that there's overemphasis on suffering, that you have to repeat, life is suffering in order to be liberated from suffering. And so this overemphasis has become an obsession. And so suffering somehow became so overpowering that sometimes people think Buddhism is pessimistic. And suffering became what Sister Chandra called the bug in a soup. It got into the three Dharma cells. So the three Dharma cells and the Theravadan tradition is impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And there's an excerpt in one of the sutras, and I'd like to read it because this excerpt, it's in so many other sutras. It's like a formula, and it's in Sutra 22.59 of Samyutta Nikaya, and it says like this. So the Buddha asked the bhikshu, and he said, "What do you think, bhikshu? Is form impermanent or permanent?" And the monk said, "It's impermanent." And the Buddha asked, "Is what is impermanent suffering or happiness?" And they responded, "Suffering, Venerable Sir." And the Buddha asked, "Is what is impermanent suffering or subject to change, fit to be regarded, this is mine, this I am, or this is myself?" And they said, "No, Venerable Sir." So this formula is in the sutra, but it's in so many sutras where the three Dharma seal was impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So let me just write this on the board. So the Four Noble Truths, suffering, that's the first. Causes or the making of suffering, causes of suffering. And the third, it's happiness, right? The opposite of suffering is happiness. or the end of suffering. You would usually learn the cessation of suffering. The fourth is the path of happiness. The second one is more like the path of suffering. So, the fourth is the path of happiness. And so, impermanence, suffering, and non-self. The three Dharma seals are like a mark that says that it's the authentic teachings of the Buddha. But when we look at this, something negative about suffering, isn't it? It's a bit gloomy about suffering, impermanence, right? Because this says that impermanence is suffering, non-self is suffering. Do you notice? Something about gloomy about it, very pessimistic about this formula. I mean, the teachings of the Buddha is described as good at the beginning, good at the middle, in the middle, and good at the end. And why is it so gloomy and pessimistic? Because impermanence is not always bring about suffering. Impermanence is good news, right? Our Ariali right here was a baby when he came to Plum village. But now he's a young man. Without impermanence, he wouldn't be turned into a young man. So it's good news that he's impermanent. The same thing with non-self. I mean, I'm talking about the Dharma talk. I come here. Thai is there. Thai is part of the Dharma talk. My elder siblings are also making this Dharma talk. And you, the Dharma talk is non-self. Because if it is without you, I don't think I can just stand here and have something to say. I'll be fainting and fall over. But also, impermanence and non-self are the nature of phenomena. But suffering is a feeling, it's my attitude, my reaction due to a wrong perception about reality. So there's something not right about this formula. So in this booklet, there's a sutra, it's called the Chandra Sutra. It's the very first sutra. And there's a monk. This happens after the Buddha had already passed away. And this monk, perhaps he ordained after the Buddha passed away. So he wanted to learn the Dharma. He wanted to know the true essence of the Dharma so that he could practice it. So he went up to many seniors, elder monks, and asked them for the essence of the Dharma. What's the true essence of the Dharma? And so every one of them said, all formations are impermanent. All phenomena are non-self, are without a separate self. And that peace, that Nirvana is peace, security, and the silencing of concepts. So everyone said that. And it became really clear that there's another formula apart from this formula that describes the three Dharma seals, which is impermanence, non-self, and Nirvana. And so Thai had used this sutra to adjust the three Dharma seals so that it makes sense. It's more sound. Because we have in the three Dharma seals, permanent, impermanence, non-self, and Nirvana, we have the historical dimension, but we also have the ultimate dimension. And so I will share a bit on the Dharma seals, and then I'll share practices, how we can really experience the three Dharma seals. Because for me, it's because I'm not in my head so much, I'm not so much here, that I need to experience it here. I have to find ways to really practice the three Dharma seals. So we all know impermanence. Our formations are changing perpetually, every moment. And there's two kinds of impermanence. It's called impermanence at every instant, sát na vô thường. You know, right now, at this very moment, many cells in our body are dying softly. Like I'm dying softly right now. You don't see it, but I'm dying softly. And at the same time, many cells are being born to replace these dying cells, so that you can see impermanence on a cellular level. And we hear something like, you know, we can't swim in the ocean, in the river, in the same river twice, because every drop of water has been replaced by new drops of water in this current. It's not the same river anymore. Nothing remains the same in two consecutive moments. And then there's another kind of impermanence, it's called nhất kỳ vô thường, which is a period or an event that marks a drastic change, like a birth of something, or death, or the other. Before the retreat, we had the flood. that just happened within 2 hours of torrential rain, and we're like completely underwater, wow, up to our ankle, and lots of mud. And so that's also a mark of impermanence, a period that, or an event that marks how things are drastically changing. I remember when my mom passed away, I was in, a lot of grief. And we had a retreat. It was a hiking retreat. And I was sharing about it because it was so new. It's like 2 or 3 months after my mom passed away. And when I shared about how I was walking for her, because she liked walking very much. She likes hiking very much. And during the time that we were hiking, I was really practicing for her, and she was really there. And I got really emotional, and I had tears. And then afterward, this man came up to me, he said, "Do you talk about impermanence in Buddhism? Do you know impermanence?" And he's right, I mean, we have an idea of what impermanence is, but sometimes it's so much in here, it hasn't really gone down to the heart level. It's a gut feeling, like, and so he made me really think, well, I need to get this insight down to my heart, my gut, and not just in the head. And I know a lot of us know impermanent. We know impermanent, but it's often on the head level. It's only when we hit reality. In the case of our beloved one passing away, that we know whether we had a good grasp of impermanence or not. But even if we know we experience impermanence, we know it is impermanent, but it's still painful to lose someone, like someone you really love, like your mom, right? So, from the perspective of time, we see that things are always changing. Constantly, perpetually. Which means that this thing that's changing has no separate identity, right? It has no separate self, no self-nature, because if it is, it wouldn't change. It stays like that. If he's not impermanent, he's going to stay like that as a baby, for the last 10 years. So, from the perspective of time, it's impermanent, but from the perspective of space, it's non-self. There's no separate self, no separate self-nature. No separate existence. That we are all connected, and that one is made of everything else. And we learned about this in the last few talks. Talk about our ancestor, that we cannot really take away our ancestors. Our ancestors are a part of us. We are made of our ancestors and many other things, many other causes and conditions. In other words, everyone who had ever come into my life, or anyone whom I have ever come in contact with, has somehow become a part of me. Their presence in my life has somehow either enriched my life or the other way. Leaving a little dark footprints in myself. I remember on Monday when we had a picnic in the New Hamlet. I was having lunch with Sister Chung Duk with her two attendants, and we talked about precept class and stuff like that, because we are inviting her to come and teach the precept for the winter retreat or autumn retreat or rain retreat. And I told the young sisters that when I was a novice, Sister Chung Duk was my first mindfulness manner teacher. And they asked me, one of them asked me, what training do you like most? Like back then, what training left a strong impression on you? And I couldn't remember. So I give them like a random kind of like respond. What came to mind was, what I remember was that I was really rebellious and resistant to the mindful manners. This was before the Step into Freedom books, by the way, younger brothers and sisters. And, our community was so small. It was like we had about 10 or 15 sisters. And then one day, one afternoon, in the afternoon of a mindfulness day, Thai gathered all the monastics, and he looked quite serious. And then I was like sitting in the back, and he said, "Tuệ Nghiem, please come up here." And he was like pointing right in front of him. So he wanted me to come up and sit there. So I had this long face, and I walked up grudgingly, and I sat down. And then he started to talk about the mindful manners, the importance of the mindful manners, and how we should, practice them because it makes us beautiful. And what comes to my mind was that I know they're beautiful Thai. I know the goodness of these mindful manners, but I had some fear. And it was fear of losing myself. I was having the same hairstyle with my sisters. I'm wearing the same kind of robe, the same kind of color, like brown. I was afraid of losing my identity. So one of those things that I did was that, being rebellious, I wear really colorful socks. That's the only thing that I could be different. Sisters were quite unhappy about it, but they didn't say anything to me directly because, they didn't want me to make a scene. And back then we couldn't get our clothes from Vietnam, so most of the sisters made our clothes. Sister Nghiem was one of the sisters that made clothes for us, and I inherited all my clothes from my sisters, old clothes, and I inherited from the Sister Nghiem, and she's up here to me, and so my pants would be really short, above my ankle, and I love them because it makes me different. I realized that, like I have this idea about myself, this self-image, and I was afraid of losing it, because losing it means, who am I? If I don't, if I lose this self-image, like these ideas about myself. And so we have an idea about who we are, a perception about ourselves. And we're clinging on to it, just like I did. And over the years, I realized I'm much more than this self-image, this idea about myself. It's my separate self that makes me different and unique. And I think the teachings over the years had really gone in and gone down and had changed me somehow in the depths of my being, that I was able to let go of my color socks really easily. And I was able to overcome my fear that I'm just so like my other sisters. Because the truth is that I can never be like my other sisters. And they can never be like me. My ancestors, my parents, the country where I was born in, the war we had to go through, my education, and then my adolescent years in the US and growing up in the US. I can never be like them. I'm made of all these causes and conditions. And nobody will ever be like me. And so that was really confident to know that really I don't need to be afraid of losing my identity, myself. Because I'm actually constantly changing as well, in the community. With all these inputs and output, with all the shining light that I receive over the years, with all these mirrors that's put up in front of me, and of course with the practice. So I have no static identity, no fixed identity. And that I am made of what Thai would say, the non-me elements. And in the Chandra Sutra, the Chandra, the Venerable Chandra, was not really happy when he heard, these teachings from the elders that all formations are impermanent. All phenomena are without a separate self, and that Nirvana is freedom. It's a peaceful dwelling. It's silencing of concepts. And his question was, well, if there's no self, there's no separate self, there's no self, then who actually sees and listens and learns the Dharma and practices the Dharma? Who actually attain the Dharma, attain liberation? Does that ring a bell? Too many of us? Yeah, we all have this question like the Venerable Chandra, right? So he asked this question, but no one really gave him the answer. So he thought, okay, who is it among the elders that I could help me resolve these issues that I have, this question? So he thought of the Venerable Ananda. So he traveled and found Venerable Ananda and shared his story of how he was asking the elders the essence of the Dharma, and this was their response, and this was his dilemma, if there's no self, then who is this who's practicing? Listening to the Dharma. And then the Venerable Ananda was very kind and complimented him that it's good that you don't know and you admit that you don't know. It's good that you're confused and you admit that you're confused. I love this because the truth is we don't know everything. And yet, most of the time, we just want to save face, or you say, I know that. And so it's really comforting to know that, this monk admitted it that he didn't know. So it's okay for me to admit that I don't know. And so the Venerable Ananda quoted a sutra that the Buddha had given to the Venerable Katyayana. And in the Katyayana Sutra, I think it's a chanting book, says that the Buddha said that when the six sense organs come in touch with the six sense objects, it gives rise to consciousness, to perception. And we have a perception of reality based on the contact between my organs, my sense organs, and the six sense objects. And we're getting caught in this perception, and we cannot see. We cannot see the true nature of things, because when we have a perception about something, that's our reality. It's so real, right? For me, that's the most difficult thing. Perception is like the most difficult thing to work with, because it's my reality. It's like I have an idea about myself and about my brothers or sisters, and that's really hard to really see otherwise, because that's the reality that I see. And because we're so caught in it that we don't really see the person's reality, true reality. And perceptions are often a construction of our mind, based on our conditioning, based on our education, our past experiences, and everything else, ancestors and everything else. And so we're caught in ideas and perception, and especially the idea and perception on birth and death, being and non-being. And these ideas bring about so much fear and suffering. So we have fear of dying. That's because we have an idea and a perception about death. And the Buddha taught that when causes are sufficient for suffering to arise, suffering arises. When causes and conditions are no longer sufficient, then suffering ceases. And we hear the formula, this is because that is. You know, we've heard this in the past few talks. This arises because that arises. This ceases because that ceases. Therefore, it has no separate self or no separate existence. So the answer to that the Venerable Ananda offered to Venerable Chandra's question is that there is no need for a separate self. There's no need for a subject or a self. That when conditions are sufficient, things manifest. When conditions are no longer sufficient, it ceases to manifest. And this insight helps us to transcend the notion of separateness, of separate self. Transcend the notion of being and non-being. And so there's no need to have a separate self of us listening to the Dharma or experiencing the Dharma, because we manifest because conditions have been favorable. Just like one of the examples that they always use is the wind or the rain. When we say the wind blows, it's as if, well, the wind doesn't need to blow, right? We don't have to say the rain blows, right? Because if it doesn't blow, it's not the wind, right? If it doesn't blow, it's not the wind. It's just air, like here, air. But if there's like this breeze this go through, then we know that this is the wind. So we don't say the wind blows. And that there's no subject needed. It's like no one there to blow and make the wind. Just like the rain. There's no rainer. The rain, it falls. If it's rain, if it's not falling, it's not rain. Maybe it's a cloud. So there's no need for a subject. There's no need for a self. Is that clear? Yeah? Okay. So let us listen to a sound of the bell to breathe together before we continue. So Nirvana is a state that's free from ideas and notions and concept. The idea of dying, of birth, of being born, of being, of non-being, of coming, going, same or other. We've learned this in the past talks too. I feel like I'm just repeating what my sisters and brothers have said. So, and so Nirvana is really the extinction of all our ideas and notions. So it's good that you're not thinking too much, but feeling. Instead of thinking, feeling, so that we can quieten down as much as we can, like these ideas, notions. Because the louder it is, these ideas and notions, the harder it is to really work with it. The louder it is, the more we will suffer. Because we're so caught. So coming back to our breath, come into our body, helps to quiet down all these ideas and notions in our head. It's the extinction of the fire of afflictions. It's the extinction of anger and fear and doubt and craving. In other words, when we experience on the historical dimension, we see that there's birth and death. And our ideas create fear and anxiety, suffering, anger, despair. But on the ultimate level, on the ultimate dimension, it transcends all these ideas and notions. And when we are able to transcend these ideas, then we have a chance to transform our fear of dying, of being or non-being. But where can we actually find Nirvana? Where do we find this state where there's no more fear, where there's no more afflictions? Where there's great freedom. And Nirvana is so necessary. It's so necessary because in the sutra that the Buddha taught, the Udana, which is also in here, the Buddha said that there is an escape from the born, the become, the made, the conditioned. So on the conventional truth, there's the born, there's the become, there's the made, there's conditioned. And because we're so caught up in it that we suffer. It's as if we're wearing these tinted glasses and this is how we see reality. And that Nirvana is really necessary because it's a refuge. And it's an escape for us from the born and the become. In other words, there's a place for us to go. Like this world that we are experiencing on the conventional truth. If there's no ultimate truth of Nirvana, then we don't really have a place, a true refuge, where we can find true freedom, where we can be completely free from notions, from ideas, from afflictions. But where do we find it? The Buddha says that we find Nirvana in the samsara. In other words, we find Nirvana here. Sometimes we say that the third noble truth, which is happiness, is Nirvana, the great happiness, Nirvana. And that we can experience Nirvana in the suffering. Because when we look deeply into our suffering, we can see Nirvana in it. Just like the mud and lotus. We can say the mud is the suffering, and the lotus is Nirvana. And we need the mud, right, to cultivate lotuses, because without the mud, we wouldn't be able to grow. We wouldn't be able to have lotuses. And so in the mud, we can find the lotus. We see the lotus. So in the suffering, we can see Nirvana. So right here, right now, why I'm suffering, if I have the practice, if I have a clarity of mind to see beyond the conventional way of seeing things, then I have a chance to touch Nirvana, to touch true happiness here and now. And the example that Thai always used was the wave in the water. The wave is a metaphor for the conventional dimension, the relative dimension. And the water is the ultimate dimension. That the water, if it wants to, if it's looking for its true self, it doesn't need to seek anywhere else. All it needs is to bend down and touch the water and see that the water is its true nature, so that it can transcend the ideas that it's born and dying. It's big or small, it's beautiful or less beautiful. That if we touch our true nature, then we can transcend this fear of dying, of being born, of being and non-being. So if we look deeply into samsara, we can find Nirvana. We look deeply into the mud, we can see the lotus. And so Nirvana is here and now, can be experienced here and now. We call it Hiền Pháp Niết Bàn, experienced Nirvana that can be experienced right here and right now. And so the three Dharma seals, with impermanence, non-self, and Nirvana, helps us to go from the relative truth, relative dimension, and to touch the ultimate dimension. So when we contemplate on impermanence and non-self, we have a chance to come in touch with Nirvana right here and right now. And so impermanence or non-self are real insight, contemplations. And we have what we call wisdom of adaptation. These are wisdom, insight, impermanence and non-self are wisdom, or insight, that with this contemplation, it gradually takes us from the historical level, historical dimension, to touch the ultimate dimension, which is Nirvana. So it makes it complete that there's the ultimate, there's the relative dimension. Right now, we are here right now, we're experiencing with the practice of impermanence and non-self, with this insight that's not just up here, but down to the heart level, the gut level, we can experience Nirvana here and now, because we're free from the idea of a separate self, and also from a fixed identity, from things being permanent, fixed. So impermanence or non-self, for me, they're vehicles for us. The vehicles that would take us to Nirvana. So hop into these vehicles, and you're there. It's taking you there to Nirvana, where you experience great happiness and great freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from afflictions. Isn't that great? No more afflictions, no more fear, no more suffering. But how do we practice this in daily life? Well, the third noble truth, which is Nirvana, in the Four Noble Truths we see that there's a path to tap into happiness, to tap into Nirvana, and that's the Noble Eightfold Path. In other words, for us to experience Nirvana, like the ultimate dimension, all we need to do is just practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Isn't that simple? And we all know this. In other words, it's in the way we think, we speak, we act, we live our daily life. It's through our practice of mindfulness, concentration, and insight that we can touch Nirvana and we can experience Nirvana here and now. That Nirvana is no longer an idea or a concept. It can be experienced when we practice the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. So for me, the entry point, to the Noble Eightfold Path, or to Nirvana, is mindfulness. And in the sutra, on the discourse on the full awareness of breathing, we've heard this like over the last few talks already. Just this breath. If I breathe in and out mindfully, which is this one in breath and one out breath, I'm cultivating mindfulness. And I'm ready to tap into Nirvana with just this breath. In the Buddha, in the sutra, the Buddha taught the last 4 exercises, which is exercise 13 to 16, or to contemplate on impermanence. Contemplating on impermanence of all phenomena, on the nature of non-craving, and attachment of all phenomena. Contemplating on the nature of no birth and no death. Contemplating on letting go of concept and notion. So we have the practice to tap into Nirvana, and that's the practice of mindful breathing. But on a daily basis, we can also practice mindfulness throughout the day. You know, the 4 foundations of mindfulness are really concrete teachings on how to practice mindfulness. And that the Buddha said that those who practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness for maybe just 2 weeks can expect one of 2 fruits. The highest understanding in this very life, or if there remains some residue of affliction, they can attain the fruit of non-return. And that is why we said that this path, the path of the 4 establishments of mindfulness, is the most wonderful path which helps beings realize purification, transcend grief and sorrow, destroy pain and anxiety, travel the right path, and realize Nirvana. So you have everything you need to experience Nirvana. It's with this breath, the body awareness, awareness of my feeling, smiling with my feeling. But also, for me, the easiest way in my daily life that I could really touch non-self in Nirvana is when I eat. Do you know when I eat? It's a concrete way to see how I am made of the whole universe. And I need this food to survive. And that this whole universe, it's becoming a part of me. It's nourishing me. And that I'm not separate from this whole universe. That's a very concrete way to experience non-self, right? To transcend the idea of a separate self, right? And then urinating, defecating, and even when you are showering, like really mundane things that we do in a daily life, that if we are truly there and mindful and present, we can really see the impermanence, selfless nature of our body, our mind, and also to tap into freedom from these concepts of a separate self. But when you have suffering, instead of like becoming a victim of it, feeling pity for yourself, seeing you're the victim of the society, of your parents, really ask yourself, what is the goodness of this suffering? Because we talked about the goodness of suffering, right? I mean, it must be good somehow That's why it's one of the holy truths. So what's the goodness of suffering? What's the goodness of the suffering I'm right here that I'm experiencing right now? Well, if you look into it, you can see the non-self of the suffering and the impermanent. First of all, the impermanence of it, that it's going to pass, right? That the suffering is not going to stay there forever, that it will pass. And that's good news. That can take off like a lot of like heaviness in us to know that this experience I'm having right now, even if it's like really dark, if I'm in a dark hole, for instance, that it will pass. But when I look deeply into this suffering, I see that they're my parents suffering, they're my ancestors. I'm not all responsible. My society is also playing a part in it. My education and everything else, all the conditionings that I experienced in my, growing up, all play a part in creating the suffering. So I see the selfless nature of this suffering. So that's the goodness of suffering. Suffering becomes an opportunity for us to see our true nature, to transcend the suffering, and to experience Nirvana, to experience great happiness right here and right now in this suffering. And even if there might be still some discomfort inside, even if, when we have this insight that it's impermanent and non-self, I may still have discomfort, maybe pain, but it no longer has the charge to overwhelm me and incapacitate me. That's, to some degree, I already experience peace and happiness. So, Nirvana is our true nature, whether you know it or not. It's our true nature. And what it takes is a shift in our consciousness, sort of like a paradigm shift. Through the practice, through the contemplation on impermanence and non-self. Through the practice of mindfulness. To help us transcend ideas about birth and death, being and non-being. And this shift can help us to experience and to see Nirvana here and now, true happiness and freedom here and now. So, awakening is possible. That's really good news about these 3 Dharma seals. Awakening and freedom, great freedom is possible, great happiness is possible. And what I see living in a community is that this awakening is not just my own awakening, it's a collective awakening. And that when we are here like this together, each of us has awakened to some degree. In my Dharma sharing group, I was just really blown away by how much people transformed within 10 days. Even if they may still have some suffering, but the transformation is so tangible. And that there's happiness, true happiness. There's awakening. And that awakening can be experienced by everyone. And it's our individual awakening that contribute to the collective awakening. And this is what we need. We need this collective awakening because our awakening with everyone's practices, it's really creating waves that ripples out and awaken people everywhere. That the word our awakening contribute to the collective awakening of the whole humanity. So our practice, when we practice, we become useful. Even if we have not done any teaching, our own awakening helps us to be useful to the world. Because our awakening helps the world to wake up as well. And this is what our society, our world is needing, collective awakening. So thank you for practicing with us, and thank you for waking up to realize your true beauty, your true goodness, your true nature, so that we all can contribute to make this world a better place for everyone, for our children. Thank you.